Welcome to the 2020 AP Econ Microeconomics AP Exam Review. We are covering Microeconomics, Unit 4 today, which is covering Chapters 8, 9, 14, 15, and 16. So let's jump right in. We're looking at the supply curve in Chapter 8. Behind the supply curve, the inputs and costs, this from our esteemed Krugman textbook. We start off with the production function. This is the idea that as we use inputs, we are going to be able to produce with those inputs. We're going to be able to come up with something, goods or services that we're able to produce as a result of this. So this creates the production function, which we'll look at in a second, which basically looks at this idea of what we can produce based on those inputs. But going back to this for a second on the production function, a fixed input is something in which you cannot, the quantity is fixed, you cannot vary it. You're using whatever it is that's available, versus a variable input in which the quantity the quantity that you're using can be varied in terms of how much or how much of a resource you can use or utilize as a result. Now, in terms of inputs, remember, long run means that all of inputs are variable. Everything's variable in the long run. In the short run, you may have some fixed inputs in that there's nothing you can do about it. You have to use them or do your best with what you can, but you can fix that in the long run. You can get rid of those things. So think of it like a capital resource, a building that you're in. Maybe you don't like it, but you have another year and a half on your lease. So in the long run, you can fix it. But in the short run, you're stuck with the situation. You've got to use the resources that you have available. And so that's what we see in the difference here between long run and short run. And as we know, as we get to the idea of looking at long run and short run in terms of what's variable in that respect, we see that everything is variable in the long run. So the total product curve then is going to show, based on the inputs, based on the resources we're able to use and use up as part of this efficiency, we're able to produce goods and services with those inputs. So for the workers that we hire, human resources, we can also utilize those resources in order to, in this case, we're going to use them on the farm to harvest bushels of wheat. So the more workers we hire, obviously the more total product we can create. But that doesn't mean that every new worker is going to add the same amount of yield as the earlier workers. There is what's called a marginal product of labor, and that is diminishing over time. As you add individual workers, you may not necessarily see the same type of gains as you did in the earlier workers. Notice the first worker can harvest 19 bushels of wheat. Notice that the eighth worker here, it's only 5. What's happening? What's going on? And our scenario that we used in class was the widgets production. We made little booklets called widgets out of this experience. And as we added workers, we added a lot of confusion. We added a lot of communication problems and other types of issues along the way that impacted that particular production line. And so just because you add a worker doesn't mean you're going to add the same level of production, and that's the diminishing marginal product of labor that we see here. So if we look at this over time, you can see that marginal product of labor is calculated by looking at the difference, the margin, between 0 and 1 worker, or between 1 worker and 2 workers. And you can see what they're able to produce is diminishing over time or over workers as we add more workers. But the idea is you're not necessarily producing more product per worker. You're producing more product, definitely. The total product continues to rise as we see here, but the marginal product of labor in terms of what we're producing per worker is very different in that respect. So how do we get to the marginal product of labor? Well, we look at the change in quantity of output and divide it by the change in quantity of labor. So the marginal product of labor is essentially that change, that difference between the worker that we're adding and the output that is gained as a result of that. So the change in quantity over the change in labor is going to give us that. And usually the change in labor is, from 15 to 16, so it's usually 1. So whatever the output is going to give us our marginal product of labor in that regard. And that's going to tell us when our total product is rising in terms of what we're gaining, are we continuing to contribute to the total product in a way that is profitable? Are these workers that are with us still adding to the bottom line in terms of being profitable in hiring them? Otherwise, you obviously wouldn't want to hire them if it's just adding to costs and not adding to revenues. So diminishing returns to the product of labor, as we talked about in this example, is this idea that as we continue to add workers, we add other factors that could influence what is being produced and impacting total product, which is still rising, but not at the same clip, and not at the same rate. And so as a result of those additional workers, we may start to see some of that fall off, and that does have an impact. And the marginal product of labor curve here graphed shows that there are diminishing returns, that as we add workers, we are seeing the workers fall off in that regard, and that does have an impact in terms of whether or not we should continue to hire workers if we know that the marginal product of labor is continuing to diminish. So that's when we have to look at our costs and benefits, right? Cost-benefit analysis to see what revenue are we getting from this versus the cost that we're paying for the worker, and determine whether or not that worker is really worth the money that's involved here. So again, fixed cost. The idea is it's a fixed input, doesn't change over time. You're going to continue to pay that. Think of it like a mortgage or a lease payment, something that has a fixed period of time. Now, a variable cost, at least a little different from a mortgage. You could always sell the property, but or get out of the lease. But variable cost is the idea that you are paying for the product that is produced, and at times that cost may be more expensive. Sometimes it may be less expensive. So it is variable depending on the quantity of output that you're producing with it. Maybe a machine that breaks down more often and needs repaired. The more you push it, the more it's going to cost in order to do that. The lighter you are on it, you might be able to run smaller loads through that machine much easier, and it doesn't require as much maintenance. So that's a variable cost aspect that you would see here. And then total cost obviously is adding them both together. So think of it in terms of your fixed cost, pretty much straight line over time, and then variable costs continue to rise the more you're using it. And total cost is basically adding them up. Now, you may remember we talked about cost curves. The idea of average fixed cost is going to diminish over time, and that's because as you add more product, you're producing more output. The average fixed cost, the cost per unit that you're producing, tends to be smaller and smaller and smaller. So the idea there is that the more pizzas that you produce with that oven, the cheaper that oven becomes in terms of what the average fixed cost was per pizza over the life of the oven itself. And so that continues to fall with the average fixed cost there. That's what they're determining there. So if we look at the idea of total cost and marginal cost, we can see total cost is rising, marginal obviously rising as well in upward sloping, because of the idea that as you produce more, the costs of each product that's being produced, there is a cost involved to that. We know that the value of the marginal product of labor is downward sloping in terms of what we're looking at there for the idea of that marginal product of labor curve, as we saw here, diminishing returns to that labor. But what we see here is that as these total costs rise, our marginal cost curve, otherwise known as, you can think of it like the supply curve, the cost of those resources as more output is produced, is going to continue to rise and go up. So that leads to a couple of differentiating factors here on terms. Average total cost, the idea of taking your total cost, dividing it by the quantity that is available to get your average. The average fixed cost, doing the same thing, only it's to fixed cost instead of total cost. And average variable cost, again, same thing. You're looking at the variable cost of all of the items. The total variable cost divided by the quantity would give you the average variable cost. So if we look at go back to the average total cost curve, then we have two factors here, and the average fixed cost diminishing over time, as I talked about before, as you put more pizzas through that oven, has what's called the spreading effect, the idea that we share the cost over time. So it doesn't cost each pizza as much because we're running thousands of pizzas literally through this oven, which makes it more cost effective versus the idea of average variable cost. The idea of over time you're going to experience diminishing returns, and any economies of scale that you gathered at the beginning, that little part of the swoosh there, will fall very quickly, and then you'll have diminishing returns setting in, and costs will start to rise. Marginal costs as well as the average variable costs. And that's what we see in this curve. As the economies of scale start to taper off, we see the diminishing returns effect starting to kick in again, and all of a sudden the marginal costs will rise wherever this intersects, again at its lowest point, and so ATC will start to increase as a result of what we see there. So this is the diminishing returns effect. You may be taking advantage of economies of scale, but initially in terms of passing those costs along, but as you produce more of those products, boots in this case, the costs are going to rise, and the average total cost will rise with it. So if we look at the cost curves, and this is a little messy, but it's important to note that marginal cost is upward sloping. The idea is each additional unit you're producing is going to cost money, and that's going to add to your marginal cost. That essentially creates your supply curve above your ATC, your AVC and your ATC. And then your average variable cost also is upward sloping, because the idea is, again, the variable cost for each particular item is going to cost you money, and if you average that out, it's going to cost, and you may take advantage in the short run in terms of the few you're producing because of economies of scale, but with diminishing returns setting in, that is also going to end up being upward sloping. So it could look a little like a swoosh at the beginning, and then it's upward sloping. And then average fixed cost is going to be downward sloping because of that spreading effect that we talked about here. So that's going to have an impact as well. And then it's important to note, at the minimum ATC and AVC, this is where marginal cost is going to intersect. The reason being because that's the differentiating point between the economies of scale that are basically dying out, and the idea of diminishing returns starting to set in, and starting to increase costs as a result of that. So what you're going to see here is when that marginal cost curve intersects ATC at its lowest point, that's where economies of scale are done on the ATC, and diminishing returns start to kick in, and the cost will start to rise as a result of that. So that's kind of the split between the ATC economy of scale and the ATC diminishing return. Okay, so if we put them all together, then what we have here is the idea of a marginal cost curve that again is upward sloping. It is intersecting ATC and AVC at their points, and in this case AVC isn't intersecting here at that lowest point. But notice that the economies of scale with ATC is diminished at the intersection at point M, the intersection of marginal cost and ATC, and then ATC costs will start to rise. Also notice the spreading effect of the AFC, the average fixed cost, because you're spreading that out over time. As more products are produced, you're going to get lower and lower, almost down to the x-axis there in terms of the average fixed costs that are available. So a couple of things to keep in mind. At minimum cost output, the ATC is going to be equal to marginal cost. That is your the idea there. Your minimum ATC is going to be where marginal cost intersects it. At your output that is less than minimum cost ATC, marginal cost will be less than average total cost. Think about it. The idea here is marginal cost is beneath ATC. So at below that intersecting point, you're going to see that marginal cost is going to be less than ATC because what you're paying per item is going to be less. You haven't kicked in that economies of scale over average total cost. That hasn't exactly kicked in yet. So you're going to see that change when the economies of scale has run out and diminishing returns kick in. And then the idea is as you add more output, you're going to notice that marginal cost will be greater than ATC, because the idea there is as you add more costs, the average total cost will start to rise, but marginal cost is already taking off. It's already going to be much higher than that because of the idea that the per unit cost, or the marginal cost, is going to be rising at a faster clip than what you see with ATC, and we see this here. You can see they intersect here at M, and then marginal cost takes off in terms of its per unit or marginal cost. That takes off, where ATC can still takes advantage of some of the aspects of AFC kicking in we can see that that's rising, but not at the same rate. AVC and ATC getting closer as AFC is getting smaller and smaller. And the idea there is that that's what we see here in terms of marginal cost rising. All right, so the idea here, marginal cost is going to be above ATC when ATC is rising. So we see that. We saw that in the last one. And then marginal cost beneath ATC when ATC is falling, when ATC is taking advantage of those economies of scale. So if you look at the idea of the marginal cost curves being upward sloping, as a firm is going to increase their production, you know, and especially as they ramp up more production, what you're going to see is the delineation of this swoosh. And the idea here is that little swoosh in the marginal cost curve, because of that, essentially the small quantity that's being produced there, you start to see that the cost, because of those economies of scale, it's harder to do that per unit. It's hard to bring that marginal cost down for a significant output as a result of that. So you have some specialization, but especially if you don't have a big production, it's hard to take advantage of that over just a small quantity of production or a small quantity of workers. So what we see here is as people start to specialize, as you start to produce more, economies of scale start to kick in, but those marginal costs are still gonna rise, even if you're able to take advantage of that for a short time period. The idea is your increasing returns will lead to your economies of scale there, and then diminishing returns return, if you will, leading to marginal costs rising, and so there are still economies of scale taking place with ATC, with the average total cost and average variable cost, but again, those are diminishing. So that will diminish faster with a marginal cost because it's a per unit. But if you're looking at what you're paying in terms of your overall costs, and total costs and variable costs, you're going to see that that's going to be rising, but it's going to rise at a slower pace than what you're seeing with marginal cost curves. And again, so what's more realistic in terms of what we see here, you can see a much larger swoosh in that marginal cost because you're taking advantage of economies of scale. Diminishing returns do set in here, and you start to see a marginal cost that is rising and increasing at a much faster clip. And that leads us to the key graph 22 of the typical cost curves in terms of what we see here. And again, MC, marginal cost, is intersecting ATC and AVC at their lowest points. Now, it's important to note fixed costs are fixed in the short run, but not fixed in the long run. Everything is variable, and that's important to keep in mind when you're looking at any scenario when it comes to cost curves. The idea of fixed costs, they're not fixed in the long run. Everything is variable. You can always sell a building. You can always change a lease. You can always find new workers. But in the short run, it's a little harder. You can't break the lease. It's hard to sell the property really quickly, that kind of thing. But the idea here is over time, you definitely can. And that's what makes the long run so critical because everything becomes variable in the long run. All right, so if you notice here, in terms of Ben's boots, the idea is you have two scenarios. One in which you have a lower fixed cost versus a higher fixed cost, and again, spreading effect over time. Notice if you have a lower fixed cost initially, that might lead to higher average total costs over time because what is variable ends up costing you more money as a result of that. If you have a higher fixed cost and less variable costs, that ATC2 might lead to a lower ATC over time because as those higher fixed costs start to be impacted by the spreading effect, you would have your variable costs start to taper off, and less of those variable costs are causing this to rise. And you can see it's kind of tapering off, or at least leveling off, not really tapering off, but leveling off in terms of what we see here in terms of that impact and that effect. Very different when you have lower fixed costs that then over time become variable versus higher fixed costs that then become variable due to the spreading effect. And then that brings us to the long-run average total cost curve, which is the idea of a relationship between all these short-run or SRATCs. These SRATCs, if you remember the visual, looks at basically think of it like monkeys jumping from a vine to another vine. Essentially, when you're looking at this, you're trying to take advantage of economies of scale on the end that is economies of scale with this cost curve. You don't want to get to the ATC where it starts to rise again, or you got to get off of it and get to another short-run average total cost curve. You got to find ways to use economies of scale to get your ATC falling again. And so companies do this all the time. They're trying to find ways to cut costs. They're trying to find ways to be more efficient and effective and cost productive with their resources, including human. And so they're always trying to find ways to bring their SRATC, their short-run average total cost curve, back into that economies of scale, that downward sloping angle of that U-shaped curve. And the reason is because that is where you're taking advantage of economies of scale. When you get on the other side of that, you've got diseconomies of scale, and then that's when your costs start to rise, diminishing returns on those investments, and that's going to cost your company money. It's going to eat into profitability, and then you're going to have to answer to shareholders. So that's really why this is so important in the long run. In order to take that effect, is because a company really wants to stay on this side of that economies of scale. Okay, so the idea here, economies of scale, just to kind of put a fine point on it, the idea here that you have long-run average total cost declines, and because you're taking advantage of any opportunities to be more efficient and effective with your resources, your inputs, you're taking advantage of every opportunity to make your product better off without making people worse off, and that's very efficient, looking at efficiency. And the importance here is also trying to do that in a way that is cost effective for your company, for your profitability, for the product line in general. Diseconomies of scale, this is when LRATC increases as the output increases. Essentially diminishing returns set in, and this is not where your company wants to be. You want to get out of this as soon as possible, because if you stay here too long, they may be calling for your job. And that's not where you want to be. And then constant returns to scale is essentially the bottom of that U, point C, if you will here. That's kind of your last ditch hope before diminishing returns set in and your average total costs start to rise as a result of that. So that's kind of your last hurrah, the sign that says, don't go any further beyond this point. That's essentially what you're seeing there. Okay, so that's Chapter 8. Let's look at Chapter 9 as we start to look at this marginal cost curve and the supply curve as it is. Let's look at a few terms. Price-taking producer. This is one in a perfectly competitive environment, which is where we still are in Chapter 9. We're not going to get into monopolies until 14. But right now, in perfect competition, we have price-taking producers. You're going to sell for what the market will bear. Price-taking consumers. You're going to buy for whatever the price the market will allow you to buy at. And the perfectly competitive market here is showing that we have price takers. We do not have price makers. That's a monopoly. That's oligopoly or duopoly. You have other options in that scenario. You do not in this one. This is really where you are a price taker, whether you're a producer or a consumer. So in this case, why is that? Well, because if you charge more, nobody's going to buy your product. And if you try to buy it for less, nobody's going to sell to you. So this essentially is the perfectly elastic or horizontal straight line we talked about, the idea that in a perfectly competitive market, and we're talking a perfectly competitive market, you don't have the option to set your price. You are a price taker as a result of this. So the industry sets that price. Mr. DARP, as it will, is created here. The marginal revenue, which equals the demand curve, which equals the average revenue curve, which equals the price. Mr. DARP is set by the market, by the industry. And that's why we have a side-by-side graph that introduces what the market will bear in terms of the industry, and then the firm's price is set by what that equilibrium is. Taking that and carrying it over essentially becomes the Mr. DARP for the firm, which is on the right-hand side. So the industry sets the price at equilibrium, and then because we are all perfectly competitive in that perfectly competitive market, we are price takers, and Mr. DARP essentially sets that price for each firm that is involved in that situation. So some conditions have to be right, obviously. If there are competitors in the space, you're going to have some portion of a market share, but you're not going to have any type of significant market advantage over others in the space. You're also going to have a standard product. It basically is a product that could be on your shelf. It could be on anybody's shelf. It could be going through the mail or on Amazon, and there really is no differentiator. Think of it like an egg. An egg is an egg is an egg. Now, we've got all kinds of fancy eggs out there. We've got organic eggs, and we've got all natural eggs, and we've got extra large eggs, and we've got, white eggs and brown eggs and all kinds of stuff. But we're talking just think of an egg, okay? Just a standard egg. And this is a commodity. Think of it like corn. We've got an ear of corn, the same product, and you're selling it, and anybody could be selling it. That's the standardized commodity that we're talking about here. There's also free entry and exit. The idea that we can easily have competitors that enter and exit this space. Somebody can say, hey, I want to open up shop and sell corn today. And then you can have 3 other competitors say, hey, I'm done in the corn business. I'm out of here. So it's very easy to enter and exit that marketplace. And in a perfectly competitive environment, it definitely is. Now, what we see here is we determine how long we're in the game based on marginal revenue, or Mr. DARP telling us how much revenue are we making off per product. This is the idea of the change in output, which is usually 1. So if the change in total revenue based on what we're selling divided by the change in output, which is 1, essentially the marginal revenue is that change in total revenue. And that additional output that we're looking at here is essentially the marginal revenue generated by one more sale of that particular item. Now, we go back to the original cost curves, which are at MC equals MB, right? And in this case, it's MC equals MR. So in all of the graphs we're going to look at in these chapters in Unit 4, we're looking at where the marginal cost equals the marginal revenue, where that marginal revenue is the change in revenue based on the change in output. Which is usually 1 again. So MC equals MR is that optimal output rule. That's what we're going to be looking at in every key graph at MC equals MR. We may not necessarily using the price at MC equals MR, like in Monopolies, you take it up to the demand curve, but the idea is MC equals MR is going to determine our quantity, our optimal output in terms of how much of a quantity we should be producing, and that's what we see here. So the price-taking firm is going to look to that MC equals MR for their optimal output rule. Again, everybody's in the business of making money. There's responding to incentives, and so what they're looking for is maximizing profit by producing where marginal cost of the last unit is equal to the market price. Okay, so that's the idea that we're looking for there. The idea of marginal cost of that last unit that you should be producing is equal to the market price. And so that's what we'll see here. If we look at MC equals MR, Mr. DARP, remember, is MR. And that is the price and the demand and average revenue. So where MC equals MR is going to be our profit maximizing point. That is the last unit produced at that particular price point. That is going to be our optimal output in this example. And the marginal revenue curve, or Mr. DARP, is going to showcase that. Okay, so a couple things to keep in mind. When total revenue is greater than total cost, you're making money. You're profiting. Congratulations. That's a great place to be. If your total revenue is equal to total cost, still a good place. That's called normal profit, or zero economic profit. It's also break even, if you want to think about it that way. Think about it as if you've paid all of your bills, including all of your workers, all of your mortgage, rent, lease, electric bills, all of your vendors. Everybody's been paid. You just have no money left over. Okay. Most businesses would say, hey, that's a pretty good place to be right now. Not a bad place for me, given where we are. So that's break even, and businesses would rejoice if they made it that far. And the total revenue being less than total cost means that the business incurs a loss. And we know if we're not able to meet our average variable cost, then we would be in shutdown condition. We'd be closing our doors, at least for the short term, to reorganize and try and figure out how to pay our bills and reopen. But many businesses that aren't able to meet their average variable costs end up leaving, and as we know, a lot of them don't reopen, which is sad. So in the short run, what are we looking at? Well, again, MC equals MR determines our output. Notice the ATC intersects MC. MC is intersecting ATC at its lowest point. That's where the diminishing returns come back to ATC, and costs will start to rise, even as marginal costs are exploding, shooting up. We see ATC is starting to rise. And this is what we call minimum cost output, the idea that the minimum cost in terms of that marginal cost is going to be minimized at the minimum ATC here at point C, and that's what we see in this particular graph. So in terms of profitability then, how do we determine this? Well, notice in the last graph, we were at break even because minimum ATC was at Mr. DARP, and at that point, they're break even. So you're paying all your bills. Here is an example where they're actually making money, and this is because you've got, again, MC equals MR determines our output, which is right here. But take that same line down to ATC, this becomes your profit. Okay, because these are your costs. Anything above this particular line, this is all what you're paying out to vendors, to bills, to your workers, whatever. Anything above that, up to Mr. DARP, is going to be your profit margin. So that means you're making money. You're in positive revenue, which is a wonderful place to be, and profitable as a result. Okay, here's an example, not so good. Again, MC equals MR, which would take us here, optimal output of 3. But the costs exceed marginal revenues. Mr. DARP is down here. And when ATC, our average total costs, are higher than Mr. DARP, we're losing money. Now, depending on where AVC is, we may be in shutdown condition. We don't know. But the idea here is that we are losing money. We are not profitable as a result of this. And again, the idea of break even or normal economic profit or zero economic profit essentially is when you've been able to meet minimum ATC at Mr. DARP. And that's again a good place to be. If you're doing that, you're break even. If your market price is less than minimum ATC, then you're obviously unprofitable. If your ATC is above, which is what we saw in this last example, you're essentially unprofitable. And again, you'd have to see where your AVC intersects this to determine whether you keep your doors open. If it meets MR, Mr. DARP, then you'd keep your doors open. If it doesn't, if it's above that, then you'd be in shutdown condition, which is what we see here. So the idea is you need to be able to meet AVC, your average variable costs. Then that means things like I'm able to pay my workers, I'm able to pay the bills that are coming in each month. There's just the overall fixed costs I can't get to, like, you know, I can't meet the mortgage payment, I can't meet the annual tax bill, or I can't meet, you know, the bigger ticket items. That's more of concern. And that's really where businesses tend to fall, because if they can't meet the average variable cost, then it's really hard to reorganize those that are coming in monthly and pay the bigger ticket items that are longer term as a result of that. So if your price falls below AVC, you're in shutdown condition, and unfortunately that happens all too often in that regard. So the idea here, your minimum average variable cost, if you're anything above if you're meeting that, wonderful, but the idea is at anything less than $10 in this example, you wouldn't be meeting your average variable costs, and you'd be in shutdown condition as a result of that. Anything below that shutdown price, minimum AVC. Okay, which leads to key graph 23. And again, this is an example of shutdown. Your AVC is not being met at MC equals MR, determining the quantity here. Mr. DARP meeting MC equals MR, and AVC above that, ATC well above that, which means this is essentially your loss in terms of all of what you're seeing here. And you would be in shutdown. Very, very sad moment, because too many businesses, don't make it past the first 5 years. What is it? 70% of businesses don't make it through the first 5 years. And it's really sad. A lot of them, it's because they don't plan. They poor planning, poor execution, poor management. They get tired of the business over a while. But we see way too many businesses that fall into that that situation. And I mean, any businesses that have, fewer than 100 workers make up, what is it, like a really high number, like 80% of businesses in the United States are actually made up of companies that have fewer than 100 workers. And we always hear about the big companies, but it's the little ones too that really contribute to GDP. Okay, so some profitability factors. If price is greater than minimum ATC, you're making money. Again, if it's at minimum ATC, you're breaking even. And if it's less than, you're unprofitable. And if you're not meeting AVC, we know you're in shutdown. All right, so let's look at the long-run effects in terms of what is happening here in this particular marketplace. We have an individual firm. There's a break-even price here. They're at minimum ATC, keeping their doors open in the firm as the market continues to see additional production, but at lower costs, and continuing to slide, if you will, in terms of that. And what we're seeing is maybe there's other people that may be coming into the market in order to take advantage of all of the profits that were available long ago at that minimum ATC. And if they're selling for higher, at this point, at one point they were selling for $18. So definitely making some cash there, which is at what break even was 14. So we see this as competitors start to jump into the space, more people come in to soak up the profits, if you will. And you can see the supply curve shifting, leading to a price of $16. Now, this is a side-by-side graph. Just to note, they put the market on the right side, the individual firm on the left, so don't be confused by that. But essentially, it's the same thing, basically showing that the supply curve is moving outward because more businesses are coming in and, like I said, soaking up the profits. Think of it like we've spilled water all over the floor. This is essentially profits, and people are coming in and going, "Oh, I want some of that. Oh, I want some of that," until all of the water is gone, and essentially the price now is at 14. People are breaking even, and some of those survive, some of those would go out of business. But that's essentially what's happening here in the long run. That's what's happening here, is that ultimately those profits will be soaked up by businesses that will come in to enjoy the fruits of your hard labor and partake of your profitability in order to people respond to incentives in order to take advantage of that. So we definitely see that. And so so the idea there is the same in terms of what we see here. Minimum ATC, if people are making money, supply curve was at 18, drops to 14 in terms of that supply shift, leading to a lower price. And as a result, what we end up with, again, short run to long run, is we end up with a minimum ATC at break-even price. So we all end up breaking even in the end. A couple of important notes about this idea of long run to short run to long run. The marginal cost in a perfectly competitive environment is going to be the same for all these firms, okay? There's free entry and exit, as we talked about, and they're going to end up with zero economic profit. They're going to end up breaking even. Nobody's going to have a better advantage over that than the other. Basically, and I think the example I used was, gas stations, convenience stores taking advantage of products that they sell to people that are buying gas and that sort of thing. Sheets and some of the other the gas stations try and take advantage of that sort of thing. But the idea is you're trying to be efficient in the marketplace, and in a perfectly competitive environment, that means you're using every opportunity to make people better off. Selling your product without making people worse off. So the point here: no mutually beneficial transactions go unexploited. That's the idea of an efficient market in a perfectly competitive industry. Because the idea there is that firms are going to enter the marketplace if there's profits. They're going to leave if nobody's making any money. And ultimately, what you're going to end up with is zero economic profit. Everybody's going to break even. And that is an extremely efficient scenario in the long run. Okay, because the idea there is that in a perfectly competitive environment, that's what business is supposed to do. Businesses in the market for making money. They join when there's profits to be made. They leave when there's no money there, or they're losing money. They all bail because, again, free entry and exit. Pretty easy to make that happen. And so it's a very efficient marketplace as a result. Now, what we see here, again, the Mr. DARP is meeting marginal cost curve here. So this is the the price, the demand at this marginal revenue or average revenue, and the ATC is above that. So this firm is losing money. Now, what will happen in this scenario, we'll talk about in a second, but essentially people are going to leave the market, and that's going to shift this supply curve, leading to a higher price level and leading us back to long run. So they'll break even. The firms that survive, good luck. The firms that survive will end up breaking even. But this is, again, a correcting mechanism that the market puts in place in order to try and bring the perfectly competitive market back to ATC. In this example, we see that the MC equals MR is above the average total cost, so this firm is making money. Now, the opposite is going to happen. If people can see there's profitability, other firms are going to join. Supply curve shifts to the right. In this model, bringing the price down to minimum ATC. So what we're going to see is Mr. DARP is going to end up intersecting here. And again, all firms that survive are going to end up at break even or normal economic profit. And then that is the point that we're trying to make here. So let's take a look at how we go from long run to short run to long run and how this actually plays out in this particular marketplace, taking a look at this idea of what's happening in all these circumstances that I just described. So we start out in long run equilibrium. This is the industry or the market, if you will. They're setting the price, and this price is carried over to the individual firm that is breaking even. So their minimum ATC is at Mr. DARP, and the marginal cost curve intersecting at minimum ATC. And so this is a break-even situation. Now, all of a sudden, demand increases. Which is shifting the market demand curve. Okay, not the firm, but the industry demand curve shifts. What that's going to do is it's going to move supply along the curve to a higher price level. All of a sudden, the price out there is $20, and this firm is making money because MC equals MR. Take that up to the new demand curve, MC equals MR, down to ATC. This is going to be the profit that the firm gets. Now, other firms are going to see, wow, they're really making money over there. That's great. Maybe I want to join and do that. They make that look really easy. So all of a sudden, firms join the market, and more supply is added because more suppliers, more competitors are in the space. That's going to be moving the supply curve outward or rightward, and demand moves along the curve. What it's going to do is bring that price level back down to $15 and return the market to break even, to minimum ATC. So we're back to where we started. So all of that demand shifting, then supply shifting, leads us back to minimum ATC at Mr. DARP, or break even, zero economic profit. This is a very efficient market in terms of doing that, and that is the way perfectly competitive markets work. Now, let's talk about efficiency for a moment in terms of the aspects of productive and allocative efficiency, which is what we look at here. Keep in mind, there are scarce resources. We can't produce everything we want to with the resources we have, so we have to pick and choose. And we have to be we have to try to be productively and allocatively efficient. So in this example, we see, again, production possibilities. Think of this as the PPF. Bikes and computers. Anywhere along the line is going to be efficient. Anywhere A through D is going to be productively efficient in terms of what you're producing here. And then allocatively efficient depends on because think of allocative, how are we allocating our resources, our inputs, effectively for society? Can we produce at G? No. Can we consume there? Yes. Advantages of trade, as we talked about back in Unit 1. Can we trade and get here? Sure. We can consume beyond our PPF. We just can't produce beyond our PPF. Now, can we produce at E or F? Sure. But again, we're not using our resources effectively. So that would not be productively efficient. And then allocative efficiency, as I said, would depend on what society wants. Are we allocating our resources more to bikes, more to computers, pushing out the curve to G because of our focus on computers? That'd be more allocatively efficient in some societies. In others, it may not. So productively efficient is this idea of price is at minimum ATC. The idea of price being at minimum ATC would be essentially, again, MC equals MR is your price at minimum ATC, not in this example. So this would not be productively efficient because it's not meeting that minimum ATC. But here, again, MC equals MR, is this at minimum ATC? Again, not at its lowest point. No, it's not productively efficient. We have resources we're not using. Here it is, because Mr. DARP is at minimum ATC, and the price at minimum ATC, or Mr. DARP at minimum ATC, is essentially productively efficient. We've utilized our resources effectively and are producing at minimum average total cost. So that would be productively efficient. Now, allocatively efficient, are we looking to allocate resources, inputs, where price is equal to marginal cost? And again, the idea here is, are we allocatively efficient in terms of the benefits that our society is getting from this product? And where price meets MC, that would be effective in terms of this. Looking at this in terms of the optimal amount that we would be producing, where price is at the marginal cost, that's essentially what we'd be referring to. Now, if we look at this model, we're not allocating all of our resources effectively if we are producing 15 when we could be producing 20. That's what we call an under allocation of resources. What if we're making 22? Well, we're over allocating resources. We're moving beyond our PPF, and that's not possible. We're going to burn out resources or not use them wisely and effectively, and we may not have them for the long run. So what we're looking for is, again, where price meets the marginal cost. And most effectively and efficiently, we're doing that allocatively efficiently where price is equal to marginal cost, and even productively efficiently where price is at minimum ATC. So that's what we see here as we close out Chapter 9. We're allocatively and productively efficient in the long run at minimum ATC meets Mr. DARP. All right, let's shift gears then and talk about monopoly. This is a big one. The idea of we're no longer in perfect competition. There is some market power going on here. And what we're going to look at is some different structures beyond perfectly competitive markets in the next 3 chapters. We see here some differentiation in this space in terms of producers that are out there. The idea of a product that can be differentiated, we're going to see that in monopolistically competitive firms more than you would see in a monopoly where you've only got essentially one product. And we'll take a look at that when we get to Chapter 16. But that's more the idea of, think of it as a shopping mall with lots of restaurants, lots of variety, lots of different foods. That's the differentiation we're talking about. In a monopoly, there's market power, but there's only one. There's only one firm. Oligopoly, there's a few. Duopoly, there's 2. But we've been in this space more often. Up to this point, we've been talking about perfectly competitive markets. Now we're going to talk about markets in which there's one firm, there's no product differentiation, and there's significant market power here. So the monopolist is going to have no close substitutes. They're going to have significant market power. They are the price maker. Okay, they're not a price taker in this respect. There are significant barriers to entry as part of this, and so if we look at the idea of a monopolist, they can raise the price. Why? Because they can. They don't have to take what the market will bear. They can set the price, and because they have market power, they are the only game in town, they have the ability to do that. And they can also arbitrarily lower the quantity in terms of what they're doing there. And again, going back to the idea of price effect, quantity effect, which we'll talk about in a minute, the idea is that we have monopolies because of that market power, because of the ability for them to profit from what they're producing and to sell it at a higher price. There obviously is a barrier to entry, or everybody would get in the space. One of the reasons, and we see this with natural monopolists, is we have them today because of economies of scale. Think of an electricity producer or a water water provider. These are natural monopolies, and they're set up by the government for a purpose, and that is because they take advantage of economies of scale. taking advantage of that that marginal cost and ATC, economies of scale, that little swoosh at the beginning there. So by having that, essentially they can take advantage of those economies of scale and pass along those savings to the consumer. And be regulated by the government in terms of what prices that they can charge. And so you can pass along those savings to consumers, and hopefully consumers benefit. And that's the idea behind it in terms of why we have those monopolies today. Also, sometimes a monopoly is de facto because of technology that it creates, patents that it allows around particular products that tend to take off very quickly, and patents that are surrounding that particular item can have an impact on the type of monopoly that is able to benefit from it. So what we see here is we see the natural monopolist is taking advantage of those economies of scale. We want them to take advantage of those economies of scale, and that's why there's a huge barrier to entry here. You can't start your own natural gas company or water company in the District of Columbia. That's very hard to do. You can start a natural gas company probably anywhere you want, but there's huge economies of scale to get up to speed. Capital expenditures are through the roof in terms of getting up to speed on those types of things, and that's really where it's important that a monopoly has that capability to utilize that economies of scale and pass along at least some of those savings, especially in a natural monopoly, to the consumer. As a result of that. Now, we know that a monopoly is going to maximize profit. They're in the business to make money. It's a profit motive. They are still a business just like others. But what we do notice is that there's going to be a difference here, because there's what we call the wedge, this downward sloping marginal revenue curve. As they lower the price for additional quantity that they're creating, they're going to have to lower the price on all of those products. Which means that the marginal revenue, the price, the revenue from each individual unit is going to be smaller over time. And that's going to lead to a downward sloping marginal revenue curve that falls faster than the demand curve, which essentially creates that wedge that we see between demand and marginal revenue in the monopoly graph. And we'll talk about that here in just a second. Now look at the differences between the perfectly competitive firm and the monopolist. Notice the perfectly competitive firm is a slave to the price. They are essentially dealing with total price elasticity in the market. In a perfectly competitive market, you are a price taker. You will deal with whatever the market will bear. You cannot set your price. You have to pay it. A monopolist, quite the contrary. They set the price. They're a price maker, and they can determine what that price is. Now, as I said, this is where we get into the idea of quantity effect and price effect. Now, quantity effect is the idea that as you sell another unit, you're going to increase total revenue by the price, and you're going to make that up with quantity effect being stronger here because you have a lower level of output. But the price effect is many times called the Walmart effect, is essentially if I'm going to sell more of this product, I've got to cut the price on all of the units that I'm selling. So that's going to cut revenue. But the idea is I'm going to sell more of that product as I cut the price. So the price effect essentially takes over, allowing me to have higher levels of output in terms of what I'm selling, and I essentially make it up in volume. Walmart does not make a fortune off of an individual customer. Walmart makes pennies off of a customer. They just get tens of thousands, if not millions, of customers. And that's where they make their money. But they don't make money in the quantity effect. They're making it in the price effect. That is the biggest difference because they are lowering those prices, always low prices, always. And they're doing it because they're making it up in volume. And that is the price effect at work. Cutting those market prices on all of the units that are sold, the quantity, the higher levels of output that are there, that's where they're going to make more money as a result of this. So the downward sloping demand curve, the downward sloping, more contrasted marginal revenue curve is a result of what we see here. And so we see the price effect and quantity effect at work in terms of the idea of again, the price effect stronger at higher levels of output because as you sell more of those, you're going to have you're going to make money. And the quantity effect, if I sell one more item at that higher price, I'm not going to cut my costs. I'm only going to sell one more of that item. Each quantity item that is sold is making me more money at the lower levels of output as a result of that. So that's what we are seeing in terms of what's at work. So quantity effect, price effect, essentially breaking that down, as you can see here, in terms of what's at work, because at those higher, at the smaller quantities, the lower level of output, the quantity effect is going to be greater. At the larger quantities, as you mass produce, and this is what Walmart does, they buy in massive quantities, they're going to lower those prices because they're going to make it up in volume, and that's exactly what we see here. Okay, so that essentially is the idea that the demand curve is above the marginal revenue curve, and why the marginal revenue is dropping so quickly and faster than the demand curve in this regard. Again, a monopolist isn't going to have to sell, and they do have a lot of market power in terms of what they can sell there. But again, it's still quantity effect and price effect at work. So if we look again at this lower level of output, the quantity effect is stronger. Higher level of output, the price effect is stronger. And that reiterates what I was talking about there in terms of that point. Okay, so the profit maximizing output and price is going to be at MC equals MR. Notice the marginal cost for a monopoly is here at 200. MC is intersecting the marginal revenue curve, the downward sloping marginal revenue curve, at point A, and this is going to be the optimal quantity that should be produced, but it's not the optimal price, okay? Because remember, a monopoly doesn't have to charge what its marginal cost is. They can charge more because they have market power. They're a price maker. So take this quantity up to the demand curve. What would people pay for this item at the demand curve level at this quantity? They'd pay $600, 3 times what the marginal cost was. And so that is what the monopoly will charge. And the monopoly will profit anything above your average total cost, there it is, up to the demand curve. This is all profit. And that is the difference between a perfectly competitive firm and a monopolist. And we definitely see that shaping up here in terms of the differences that are being made. In a perfectly competitive industry, MC equals MR would determine the quantity that's being produced at MC equals demand. The idea that where your demand curve is, your marginal cost, marginal benefit, essentially, would be what you'd see here. That would be the optimal quantity in a perfectly competitive market. But this isn't a perfectly competitive market. It's a monopoly. And they're going to produce at MC equals MR. And so the idea here is that that quantity is arbitrarily smaller because of their market power. They can charge more because of their market power, and they do. So price is equal to marginal cost at their profit maximizing quantity of output. When their price is greater than marginal revenue, the idea here is it is going to be equal to marginal cost at their profit maximizing quantity of output, because MC equals MR. So the price is going to be higher, and they're going to charge more because they can. Why would they produce a smaller quantity? The idea there is a monopolist is going to produce a smaller quantity because they can charge more for each one. They can charge a higher price, and they can profit even more so than a perfectly competitive firm would do. And we definitely see that playing out. Again, MC equals MR determines our quantity that's being produced. Take it up to the demand curve to determine what price we're selling to consumers, and then take it down to the ATC, which is here at point C. Everything from the demand curve to ATC is essentially our profit. Everything below this line here becomes all of the cost, the average total cost that you're paying. Everything above that up to where the consumer pays is going to be the monopoly's profit. And as you can see, they're making a lot of money as a result of this. So if we break that down in terms of consumer surplus and producer surplus between perfectly competitive markets and monopoly, you will see here that the consumer surplus much greater with perfectly competitive markets, and a much smaller in a monopoly, much smaller. A lot of deadweight loss, right? Because we're not producing at this quantity of MC equals D. We're producing at MC equals MR and taking this up to the demand curve. And this is their profit. And this is deadweight loss, quantity that could be produced in a perfectly competitive market, but is not, because we are in a monopoly as a result. Okay, so looking at the natural monopolist then, again, MC equals MR determines the quantity that is produced here, and this is going to lead to, again, their price of a monopolist, and the ATC is going to determine what profit they have. They are making money. Notice it's not as large as what you saw before. But there is money to be made there. And this is an unregulated natural monopolist. Now remember, public ownership is really important here, but a lot of times they're poorly run because there's not a lot of profit to be made, and so there's not a lot of incentives for people who are more profit driven in companies like this to be able to maintain. A lot of them will live very short tenures in these businesses because they want to move on to a company where they're making bigger profits. So the consumer surplus, notice in a regulated natural monopolist is going to be, the consumer surplus is much greater. The profit almost non-existent. Because remember, MC equals MR, take this up to ATC. If they're paying ATC equals demand, which would be their which would be what a regulated natural monopolist would be doing, then as a result of that, you're going to see this company losing money. Because in terms of what they're charging and what their costs are, they're well, in this case, they're still going to be making a bit of money because they're ATC. Well, no, they're charging down here. So as a result of this, they're actually losing money because this essentially would be their costs and what they're bringing in. So this would be a negative profit. They'd be losing money and going out of business. And obviously, regulators, government entities don't want a natural monopolist, a public utility going out of business. So they're going to find ways to get them to meet their average total costs, make a little bit of money, not a lot of money, and keep them in business. Why? Because they don't want them to go under. The last thing they want is for a public utility to go under and then everybody's out, electricity or water or whatever the case may be. So sometimes public ownership is the way to go and the way that they approach that. And that has an impact too in terms of how well run it may be. A lot of times there's a lot of waste, fraud, and abuse that results from that, and then they end up privatizing it all over again. So there are some downsides to that in terms of what takes place there. But the idea is there's some price regulation, and a government will step in and regulate those prices in order to keep them afloat so that they at least don't go under as a result of that. Okay, price discrimination. Can they price discriminate? Well, obviously they're doing that. They're charging different customers different prices, and they're able to do this successfully. And a good example of this is when you get on an airline. The whole idea of price discrimination is if you're a business traveler, I can't stay over Saturday stay. I can't book this 2 weeks in advance. I've got to have this flight now. I need to get on this plane tomorrow morning. Versus a student traveler that's booking this flight months in advance, and it's their spring break, and they're going to stay over a Saturday, and there's lots of. Well, I also have a coupon. There's lots of things going on there. So there's definitely price discrimination going on in monopolies. And they're doing this because, again, they're price makers. They can set the price whatever they want it to be. So it can be $150. It could be $100. Well, they'd be losing money there, but I guess $125. And they have the ability to do that. But they're doing it because because they have that market power, and we definitely see that playing out in the airline industry and other industries like it in terms of what's happening there. So notice the two-price structure with price discrimination in terms of what's happening here, in terms of what they're able to produce, versus price discrimination with three monopolies that are profiting based on those different prices. And the idea here is they can capture more of that consumer surplus. What are you willing to pay? The more they can shrink that consumer surplus, the more they can profit, turn that consumer surplus into profit. Because the last thing they want is to charge a price too high that no one is willing to buy it, and that's of no benefit to them. So that's where they get into business class, and you've got first class and business class and lots of other things they sell to you. Why do they nickel and dime us when we get on those planes? Because they're trying to take advantage of every opportunity to make a buck. because that adds to their profit margin and their bottom line. So perfect price discrimination, monopolies do use it. What are they trying to get to? They're trying to basically eliminate every consumer surplus that's there so that they can take advantage of selling every quantity at every price level in order to make as much money as they can. And that's essentially the goal with a monopoly being a price maker as a result of that. So that's why they go to advanced purchase restrictions. They look at volume discounts. They will they'll give you all kinds of coupons and, buy one, get a free seat or whatever. They put a lot of options out there because they want to encourage you to buy, because if you don't buy, then you're not adding to their total revenues, and that willingness to pay is left in your bank account and not in their total revenues and their bottom line for this quarter. And so that's really the driver of that monopoly. So let's switch to oligopoly, because it's very similar to monopoly. Only difference here is we've got two firms or more that are taking place here. And this is, we've heard of a duopoly, which is two. Oligopoly, there's a few players. And oil cartels are probably a good example of the oligopoly. We've heard about OPEC, the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, those that basically trade oil around the world. That's a good example of an oligopoly that we see today. In those players, but we see a number of them, from cigarettes to batteries to light bulbs. And we've talked about this to automakers. The idea here is there's usually a concentration of resources, and they have some market power. Now, they don't have price maker status quite like you saw with Monopoly, but they do have some ability to have some market power. Now, in some countries, this is illegal in the United States, but in some countries, they can also engage in collusion. OPEC is a good example of this because they get together every month or two and basically collude. They basically agree to what their quantity is going to be in order to set price levels. And we've seen that play out over the years in terms of how they set those prices and what impact it has on markets and that sort of thing. So essentially, the cartel that is created, that is colluding in terms of these agreements, is really trying to drive the prices based on what they're trying to sell, the quantities they're selling there. And this is them engaging in cooperative behavior. Now, there are also some times in which oligopolies are engaging in non-cooperative behavior, where they may not necessarily be cooperating. And in this country, you're not allowed to collude, so you have to engage in non-cooperative behavior. You're guessing what the other one may be doing, and as a result of that, what you might be wanting to make happen as a result of seeing what they're doing with their prices, charging higher or lower prices, and how that's going to impact your decisions and ultimately your bottom line. Now, we talked about this, not to beat a dead horse, but the idea of quantity competition and price competition here in terms of divvying up the market. You're going to see a lot of quantity competition, and this is when firms can't necessarily produce what they want to produce, but they're going to divvy up the market and basically price it above marginal cost to make money. So as a result of this, they're not colluding. They're engaging in quantity competition in order to make this happen, but they're doing it in order to maximize their revenues. Price competition. The idea here that they're basically going to undercut rivals in their prices, and they're going to do that in order to make money. Again, the idea of price effect. The higher levels of output at lower prices is going to make it up in volume, so to speak. And that's what leads into this idea of the game theory, the idea of looking at the prisoner's dilemma, or this study of the type of behavior when one firm is playing off of another, and how that impacts their bottom line and their revenues. The commonly known as the prisoner's dilemma, which I'm sure you can look up on YouTube. We showed a bunch of them in class related to this concept, but the idea of a payoff matrix, what are you going to get in return for making this decision or that, and how are your decisions impacted by whether the other person chooses this option or that option, and is there a strategy to that in terms of how you could play that out? Okay, so taking a look at this payoff matrix, then we're looking at Ajinomoto and ADM, and Ajinomoto is looking to produce either 30 or 40 million pounds of this product in order to make a profit. ADM doing the same, 30 million pounds and 40 million pounds. But depending on what the other one does decide to do, their profit could be impacted by that. Now, if we look at Ajinomoto wants to produce 30 million pounds, and if based on that, ADM produces 30 million, then they make 180 million. But if they decide to produce 40 million, they could make 200 million. So it is better for them to produce 40 million if Ajinomoto produced 30. But let's look if Ajinomoto produced 40. ADM would make 150 versus 160. It is better for them to go 40 million. So ADM has a dominant strategy to produce 40 million because in either scenario, their dominant strategy is to produce more of this product in order to make more money. Their profit is greater at 40 million pounds for both scenarios than it is at 30 million pounds, and thus that's their dominant strategy. Now let's look at Ajinomoto. If ADM produces 30 million, is it better for Ajinomoto to make 180 million or 200 million? Well, 200. And if ADM produces 40 million, is it better for Ajinomoto to make 150 million or 160 million? 160, of course. So both of them are under the produce 40 million pounds. That's Ajinomoto's dominant strategy. There's no incentive for them to produce less because they're going to make less money as a result of this. So both firms have a dominant strategy to produce 40 million pounds, which leads them both to this last square. And it becomes their Nash equilibrium because there's no incentive for them to leave this box. If ADM were to leave this box and produce at 30 million, they would lose money. If Ajinomoto were to leave this box and produce 30 million pounds, they would also lose money. So there's no incentive for them to leave this box, and thus not only is it their dominant strategy to produce 40 million pounds and remain in this revenue box, it is also their Nash equilibrium, their point at which both firms are maximizing their revenue based on what the other firm is doing. That's essentially the payoff matrix that we're seeing in this model. And they're going to be acting on that dominant strategy. So again, looking at this Nash or non-cooperative equilibrium, the idea is your behavior is going to impact the other firm's behavior. And you have to basically engage in figuring out, do they have a dominant strategy in terms of carrying this out? Or is there what we call the tit for tat strategy in terms of, well, they're going to do what they're going to do this time and make money, and then I'm going to turn around and do the same, and I'm going to make money next time. But ultimately, what they get into a habit of is seeing where the other one is going, and then being able to, based on that behavior, determine where they're going to make the most money. And as a result, they will profit from that. In this example, now, here's an example of what I was talking about in the tit-for-tat strategy, the idea that always cheating isn't necessarily going to help them because sometimes engaging in tit-for-tat is going to allow them to profit, maximize their profit. Here you can see always cheat may be a strategy for them in the first year, but in the second year and subsequent years, it may be better for them to play tit for tat and make more money as a result. And ADM the same. If they benefit the first year in always cheating, then they end up making more money in the following year. This is going to lead to some tit for tat behavior in terms of always cheating and then engaging in tit for tat behavior and kind of going back and forth. So depending on what the other is going to do, we're going to see that this may lead to a longer term gain in terms of the revenue that they have here, and some really tacit non-collusion in terms of not being able to collude together in terms of raising prices to increase revenues, but essentially their nonverbal behavior in terms of the actions they're making are really contributing to that type of revenue increases and non-tacit non-collusion as a result of it. So can they do this? Yes, I mean firms do this all the time in terms of looking at the prices and actions of other firms in terms of what impact it has. It's very complicated, as you can imagine, and also in a lot of cases very hard to prove from a legal perspective. But we do see, does it lead to conflicts of interest, to complex pricing? Of course, there's lots of things that are playing there, and ultimately it does lead to some type of a price war if things break down. And leads some oligopolies to then try and differentiate their products in other ways in order to gain some market some market differentiation as a result of that. So that's kind of what we see playing out in oligopolies. All right, let's move to the last chapter then, which is monopolistic competition, and the idea of differentiated markets within the same market. And the best example I can usually give to students is the idea of a shopping mall. Think of it as Westfield Montgomery Mall, for instance, that has lots of different eateries, lots of different restaurants. You can get Chinese, you can get American fare, you can get Japanese, you can get Thai, you can get fish and chips. You can get all kinds of things, and it's all under one roof. So you only have to go to one place. So many competing producers, they're all competing against each other to get your business, to get your dollars, but they're selling very different products. You may not be in the mood for Thai today. You might be in the mood for fish and chips. And so there's a lot of free entry and exit, very similar to perfectly competitive market. And that's essentially what we see in this monopolistic competition. Now, it's important to note that differentiation. Because of product differentiation here, it is almost impossible that they're going to collude in some oligopolistic sort of way. So we really don't see that in this case. And because of the free entry and exit, there's lots of firms that are coming in and going out all the time in this capacity. So there's other ways that they need to differentiate. Because obviously colluding is not going to help them gain market power. And in this case, they're price takers. They're not price makers. So the aspect of monopoly in the monopolistic portion is really the product that they're selling and they're differentiating. So think of it like differentiation by style or by the location. And a good example here, the dry cleaner that's close to your house versus one that's further away, as well as quality. Oh, those are gourmet chocolates versus another brand and or a no-name brand. And we see that with products all the time where they're trying to differentiate. And we see different restaurants at the mall that are more upscale versus restaurants that are more Chipotle-esque. And so we see very differentiated products in terms of what's making that happen here. They're competing against each other. Okay, and consumers like the fact that there's options. One of the things that people love about going to the mall is the fact that there's a variety of options. So you can bring your friends there and you don't have to eat the same thing. You can eat in the food court and you can all get different meals from different places and you can all come back to the same table. That's the beauty of monopolistic competition, is that there's lots of variety in terms of the sellers that are out there. They're all competing for consumers and they all can be successful in some capacity over time in terms of reaching consumers and making profits as a result of it. So there is a lot of those monopoly features, but a lot of those perfectly competitive markets here too that we see. And there is a lot of competition in this space. So again, what do we see here with monopolistically competitive firms? Well, in this example, you're seeing a profitable one versus an unprofitable one. Again, MC equals MR determines the quantity that's being produced. Take that up to the demand curve. This sets the price. And notice ATC, if you go down to the quantity to ATC, this determines the profit that they're making. Well, we know that as that happens, other firms will say, hey, wow, there's really a market in these different businesses, these different restaurant places. I want to open one. And as more firms come in, that can change that can shift the demand curve and ultimately lead to an ATC that is much closer to the demand curve and ultimately break-even status. So we see some of that playing out too, and this would be an example of that in terms of seeing how that breaks down. Where MC equals MR, take it up the demand curve, you're meeting your ATC, you're breaking even, and a lot of monopolistically competitive firms would be very happy to be right there. So there is part of that zero profit or normal economic profit that we see. In this firm on the right, we see it's unprofitable. ATC is actually above the demand curve here, and so they're not making they're not making profits. They're incurring losses, and again, depending on how they're doing with their ABC, they could be in shutdown condition. But what happens in these cases, with these examples that we looked at, is the demand curve can shift to the left, inward, if you've got people taking advantage of profits, or to the right, as firms exit the market, the demand is greater for your product because other firms have left, and that can change where they break down on the map with ATC. But ultimately, where will they end up in a monopolistically competitive market? Because there's a free entry and exit with differentiated products, you want to end up here at zero economic profit or normal economic profit as a result of what we see here. In the long run, that's the idea. In perfect competition, you're going to see Mr. Dart meets ATC at its minimum, MC intersecting at its minimum. That's going to be your optimal minimum cost output. And you're going to see the same thing at MC equals MR here on the monopolistically competitive front. You're breaking even as well. So both models are breaking even. They're at zero economic profit. And we see this with perfectly competitive firms and monopolistically competitive ones. Are they inefficient? Well, that's a good question. The idea is not necessarily, because they are meeting a need. They are differentiated. I mean, not everybody would want to go to a burger place at the mall if that's all they had were burger places. Somebody would want ice cream. Somebody would want Chinese food or burrito bowls from Chipotle. And they are trying to meet a need. And it is free entry and exit. The idea of businesses leaving if people aren't going to shop there, you're voting with your dollars. And so that really keeps it competitive. The competitive portion of the monopolistically competitive firm here leads to a lot of roles that brands play in addition to advertising and other ways to kind of get the word out in terms of trying to approach the markets, and branding becomes very important here in terms of trying to differentiate yourself in those markets. But what we see is the monopolistically competitive firm very similar to a monopoly. Only difference is that the ATC curve is at a higher point than what we would see with a monopoly because these firms are breaking even. And in this model, they are at zero economic profit or a normal economic profit. Because, again, MC equals MR determines our quantity. Take it up to the demand curve. That's where ATC meets demand at that particular price. They're breaking even. Now, in this model, again, MC equals MR. Take it up to the demand curve. ATC, you just passed. That's the profit. So this firm is actually making money. What will happen? The demand curve will probably shift inward, leading to a demand curve that intersects ATC and going into zero economic profit or a normal profit as a result of that. Now here's a model in which ATC is actually above the demand curve in this MC equals MR, again determining the quantity. Take it up to the demand curve. Up to ATC, this is a negative profit or a loss, and depending on where AVC is, they may be in shutdown condition. And we've seen businesses go out of business as a result of what we see here all the time because they don't differentiate, because they don't change, because they're not receptive to what the market has and is playing out there. But the idea is, where do they want to end up? You want to end up at zero economic profit, where your ATC meets your demand curve, and thus you're able to stay in business. And that is the monopolistically competitive firm, and closes out our last chapter in this unit. So we hope you found this helpful. Are you living the 5? I sure hope so. Speaking of 5, we'll be back with Unit 5 and another look at Chapter 12 in the next video. Take care, good luck on the AP exam, and we will see you soon.